The salt-kissed winds whispered through the chestnut trees of Mannahatta long before the first European sails appeared on the horizon. The Lenape people called this place the Island of Many Hills, where freshwater streams cut through dense forests and salt marshes teemed with life. Their wickiups, domed shelters of bent saplings and bark, dotted the landscape, temporary homes for a people who moved with the seasons. On a spring morning in 1524, a Lenape fisherman named Kitchi paused his canoe in the Narrows, squinting at the strange sight on the horizon. A massive wooden structure with billowing white skins was cutting through the water, something unlike any dugout canoe he'd ever seen. As it drew closer, he could see pale faces peering over the sides, their bodies wrapped in strange fabrics that shimmered in the sunlight. Verrazano's crew never came ashore that day, but their ship left ripples that would eventually become waves. The Lenape couldn't know that this fleeting encounter would change everything, that within a century, their island would be transformed beyond recognition, its hills leveled, its streams buried, its forests replaced by a grid of stone and steel. The Dutch ships arrived in earnest in 1625. Their holds filled not with settlers dreaming of freedom, but with employees of the West India Company seeking profit. Among them was Peter van Dyck, a stonemason with strong hands and a sharper tongue, exiled from Haarlem after a brawl left a nobleman's son blind in one eye. Peter's first sight of New Amsterdam filled him with equal parts hope and dread. The settlement was a haphazard collection of about 30 crude structures clustered around Fort Amsterdam. The air smelled of sawed oak, fish guts, and the ever-present tang of the sea. Children with sun-bleached hair darted between piles of lumber, while pigs rooted in the muddy streets. "They call this a city?" Pieter muttered to the ship's captain as they unloaded tools. "It's a pigsty with delusions of grandeur." Yet within months, Pieter found himself shaping the island's first permanent stone structure, the Stadhuis. As his chisel bit into the imported yellow brick, he imagined he could hear the island itself groaning under the weight of this foreign architecture. The Dutch houses, with their stepped gables and overhanging eaves, looked absurdly out of place against the wild American landscape. The settlement grew quickly but chaotically. Without proper planning, houses sprouted like mushrooms after rain, their foundations sinking into the soft earth. The single windmill creaked constantly, its sails a visible reminder of the colony's dependence on the Old World. Peter often found himself standing at the water's edge, watching ships come and go, wondering if he'd ever see Haarlem again. The morning of September 8, 1664, dawned unusually quiet. Peter's son, now called Peter Dick, was repairing the Stadhuis's foundation when a boy came running down Stone Street shouting about ships in the harbor. Peter wiped his hands on his apron and climbed to the fort's ramparts. 4 British warships sat at anchor, their guns run out, their decks swarming with red-coated soldiers. Governor Stuyvesant stomped about, his wooden leg thumping on the planks as he demanded resistance. But the people, tired of Dutch rule, tired of the West India Company's heavy taxes, refused to fight. The surrender was bloodless. By noon, the Union Jack flapped where the Dutch flag had flown. Peter watched as the new English governor, Richard Nichols, strode through the streets, already issuing proclamations about proper building codes and fire prevention. The changes came swiftly. The British preferred orderly rows of Georgian brick homes to the Dutch jumble of wooden structures. They widened the streets, straightened the lanes, and renamed everything. Peter found himself working on Trinity Church in 1698, its clean lines and symmetrical facade a stark contrast to his father's Dutch designs. Yet some things resisted change. The old Dutch families still gathered in what was now called the City Tavern, drinking Genever and speaking their mother tongue when the English weren't listening. The stepped gables never completely disappeared. They simply became fashionable again decades later, repackaged as colonial charm. The summer of 1776 smelled of smoke and rebellion. Peter's great-grandson, James Dyck, now a master builder like his ancestors, stood on the roof of a Pearl Street warehouse, watching the British fleet mass in the harbor. The Continental Army had already fled north, and panic gripped the city. On the night of September 21st, James was awakened by shouting. He rushed to his window to see an orange glow spreading along Whitehall Street. Flames leaped from roof to roof, fed by the dry wooden buildings and a stiff southerly wind. Some said patriots had started the fire to deny the British shelter. Others blamed drunken soldiers. James didn't care about causes. He cared about the Stadt Huys, now the old city hall, which stood directly in the fire's path. He ran through the chaotic streets, past families dragging trunks of belongings, past soldiers trying to form bucket brigades. When he reached the old stone building, the heat was already blistering the paint on its western wall. James joined a group of men smashing the windows to prevent the glass from acting as burning lenses. As dawn broke, a third of the city lay in ashes. But miraculously, the Stadt Huys still stood, its bricks blackened but intact. Nearby, St. Paul's Chapel, completed just 7 years earlier, stood untouched, its graveyard now filled with refugees. James looked at the smoking ruins and realized something profound. New York would always rebuild. It was in its bones. James Bogardus stood in his cast-iron foundry on Duane Street, watching workers pour molten metal into ornate molds. At 65, his hair had gone white, but his mind burned brighter than ever. He held up a freshly cast column capital, a perfect Corinthian design, every acanthus leaf crisp and sharp. "Look at this," he said to his foreman. "We can produce 100 of these in the time it takes a stone carver to make one, and at 1/10 the cost." The foreman nodded dutifully, though privately he thought the whole enterprise mad. Who would want buildings made of iron pretending to be stone? But Bogardus knew. New York was growing at a frantic pace, its population doubling every decade. The city needed buildings that could rise quickly, cheaply, and if necessary, be torn down just as fast when the next wave of progress came. His masterpiece, the Hogwood Building at Broadway and Broome, went up in 1857 with astonishing speed. 5 stories of cast-iron facade, every column and arch identical, all produced in his foundry and bolted onto a brick skeleton. The newspapers called it the Palace of Trade. Though Bogardus knew the truth, it was a stage set, a beautiful illusion. On opening day, as crowds marveled at the building's gleaming white facade, painted to look like marble, Bogardus stood across the street watching. A well-dressed merchant paused beside him. "Remarkable," the man said. "It looks just like a real Italian palazzo." Bogardus smiled. "That's the point, my friend. In New York, appearance is everything. Reality is optional." The smell of stale beer and unwashed bodies hit Mary O'Reilly like a physical blow as she entered her family's tenement on Mott Street. 4 rooms for 11 people, the walls so thin she could hear the Goldbergs arguing in Yiddish next door. In the corner, her youngest brother coughed wetly. The damp never left these rooms, not even in summer. Mary set down her sewing, she'd been finishing shirts for 14 hours at the factory, and peered out the window. Across the alley, another identical tenement blocked what little light might have entered. Somewhere up there, a baby was crying. "Mary!" Her mother's voice was sharp. "The rent collector's coming tomorrow. Did you get paid today?" Mary nodded wearily, fishing coins from her pocket. $4 for 60 hours of work. Meanwhile, just uptown, Caroline Astor swept down the grand staircase of her Fifth Avenue mansion, her silk gown whispering against the marble steps. Below her, 200 of New York's elite mingled in the ballroom, the women's diamonds glittering under the gaslight chandeliers. "Mrs. Astor?" A young Vanderbilt bowed deeply. "Your home is magnificent." Caroline smiled thinly. "One must have standards, Mr. Vanderbilt, especially in this city of newcomers." Her butler approached with a silver tray bearing a single calling card. Caroline glanced at it, then nodded. The orchestra struck up a waltz as the newest millionaire, a railroad man who'd made his fortune crushing small farmers, was admitted to her sacred inner circle. Outside, the summer air was thick with the stench of the tenement districts. But here, behind these thick stone walls, the only smells were French perfume and money. The French ship Isère limped into New York Harbor on June 17, 1885, its hold packed with 214 crates containing the disassembled Statue of Liberty. On Bedloe's Island, workers scrambled to finish the massive pedestal, delayed for years by lack of funds, until Joseph Pulitzer shamed America into donating. Among those workers was Michael Dyke, great-great-grandson of Peter the stonemason. As he mixed mortar, he marveled at the iron pieces being unloaded, a finger here, a section of torch there. The French engineers argued constantly with their American counterparts about how to assemble this jigsaw puzzle of liberty. "Hey, Mick," shouted his foreman, "stop gawking and get back to work. That pedestal won't build itself." Michael obeyed, but his mind raced. This statue, this idea of freedom, was being built on the backs of men like him, men who worked 12-hour days for $2, men who couldn't even vote in most elections. Meanwhile, up the East River, the Brooklyn Bridge was nearing completion after 14 years of construction. Its granite towers stood like sentinels, connected by steel cables that sang in the wind. Michael had watched the bridge grow since he was a boy, had seen the first daring workers, called sandhogs, descend into the pneumatic caissons to dig the foundations. Many of those men had died or been crippled by the bends. Now, as he troweled mortar onto the statue's pedestal, Michael wondered, who were these monuments really for? The rich, who could afford to ride the bridge's trolleys? The politicians who would make speeches at the statue's unveiling? Or for people like him, the ones who built them? Cass Gilbert wiped sweat from his brow as he craned his neck to take in the Woolworth Building's soaring crown. At 792 feet, it was the tallest building in the world, a Gothic cathedral dedicated to commerce. The terracotta facade gleamed in the morning sun, every gargoyle and spire a testament to Frank Woolworth's vanity. Inside the lobby, Woolworth himself stood admiring the Byzantine mosaics. "Cost me $13.5 million, he boasted to a reporter. Paid in cash every penny. Gilbert suppressed a smirk. The cash had actually been gold coins wheeled into banks in barrels, a publicity stunt worthy of Barnum himself. But the architect didn't care. This building was his masterpiece, proof that America could rival the great cathedrals of Europe. As the opening ceremony began, Gilbert noticed a group of seamstresses from the nearby garment district peering through the bronze doors. Their faces, pale from long hours in airless lofts, reflected both awe and something else, resentment. The Woolworth Building's vaulted ceilings and gold leaf stood in stark contrast to the fire-trap factories where these women worked for pennies. "Mr. Gilbert," Woolworth clapped him on the back. "What's next, the moon?" The architect forced a smile. "Only if you can pay cash, Mr. Woolworth." William Van Allen paced his drafting room like a caged panther. The Chrysler Building was nearly complete, but his rival, Craig Severance, his former partner turned bitter enemy, was racing to finish the Bank of Manhattan just blocks away. Both buildings were vying for the title of world's tallest, and Severance had just announced he'd added 2 secret floors. Van Allen smiled grimly and pulled a rolled blueprint from his desk. His foreman gasped when he saw it. A 185-foot stainless steel spire designed to be assembled inside the building and hoisted to the top at the last moment. "You're mad," the foreman said. "The wind alone." "Just do it," Van Allen snapped, "and tell no one." On October 23, 1929, as the stock market began its catastrophic plunge, a team of riggers worked through the night to assemble the spire inside the Chrysler Building's dome. At dawn, as Wall Street brokers stared in horror at ticker tapes, the spire began its 90-minute ascent. By noon, the Chrysler Building stood 1,046 feet tall, the new tallest building in the world. Van Allen allowed himself one small smile before the phone rang. It was Walter Chrysler, furious about cost overruns. The architect hung up mid-tirade and poured himself a drink. The victory was sweet but brief. 11 months later, the Empire State Building stole the crown. The wind howled through the unfinished offices of the Empire State Building as John Jacob Raskob stared out at the city below. At 102 stories, his skyscraper was the tallest in the world and nearly empty. The stock market crash had seen to that. "People will come," his partner Al Smith insisted. "Just wait." Raskob didn't answer. He was thinking of the workers who'd built this behemoth in just 14 months. The Mohawk iron workers who walked beams 1,000 feet in the air without harnesses, the bricklayers who laid 10 million bricks in record time. 5 men had died building his dream, and for what? A monument to hubris? On opening day, as searchlights swept the sky and politicians gave speeches, Raskob noticed a group of unemployed men watching from the street. One held a sign, "We built it. When do we work in it?" The answer, it turned out, was never. For years, New Yorkers called it the Empty State Building, its vast offices vacant, its observation deck one of the few profitable ventures. During the war, its spire became a mooring mast for dirigibles, a failed experiment that resulted in one near-disastrous docking attempt. Yet somehow, through sheer stubbornness, the building endured. Like New York itself, it refused to acknowledge failure. It simply waited patiently for better days to come. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe stood before his Chrysler Building, squinting against the sun's glare off its bronze facade. At 38 stories, it wasn't particularly tall, but its perfect proportions and minimalist aesthetic made it revolutionary. "Less is more," Mies told the reporters. Across the street, Philip Johnson, who designed the building's Four Seasons restaurant, whispered to a colleague, "Less is a bore." The Seagram's Plaza, an open space rare in Midtown, quickly became a gathering spot for lunching secretaries and protesting students. On one side, Park Avenue's chauffeured limousines. On the other, the gritty reality of 1950s New York. Mies's building was a spaceship that had landed in the wrong century. Too perfect, too pure for this messy city. Yet, it spawned imitators. Soon, glass boxes were sprouting across Midtown, their uniformity both impressive and monotonous. The Lever House, the Union Carbide building, all variations on Mies's theme. New York was becoming a city of mirrors, reflecting itself endlessly. The Bronx was burning. From his office at the municipal building, planner Robert Wagner could see the plumes of smoke rising across the Harlem River. Abandoned tenements, torched by landlords for insurance money, burned unchecked. The city was broke, its infrastructure crumbling, its middle class fleeing to the suburbs. On October 30, 1975, the Daily News ran its infamous headline, "Ford to City. Drop Dead." The federal government refused to bail out New York. Bankruptcy loomed. Yet amid the decay, strange new life emerged. Artists colonized abandoned lofts in Soho. Disco thumped in the ruined splendor of the West Side piers. And in the financial district, construction began on two unlikely saviors, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Critics called them the boxes the Empire State and Chrysler came in. Bland, oversized, arrogant. But they were also undeniably New York. Big, brash, and utterly confident in the city's ability to survive. Donald Trump stood in the gilded atrium of Trump Tower, admiring his reflection in the pink marble. Completed in 1983, it was everything the Seagram Building wasn't. Flashy, excessive, unapologetically vulgar. "People love gold," he told the architect. More gold. Across town, Philip Johnson was putting the finishing touches on the AT&T Building, now the Sony Tower. Its Chippendale crown a cheeky rebuke to modernist orthodoxy. Postmodernism had arrived, and with it, a new playfulness in New York's architecture. But the real revolution was happening downtown. The Twin Towers, once mocked, had become icons. Their observation decks drew millions. Their plaza buzzed with activity. On clear days, you could see all 5 boroughs from the top. Then came September 11, 2001. In one unimaginable morning, everything changed. The towers fell, taking nearly 3,000 lives with them. The city's skyline, its psyche, was shattered. Yet even as the smoke still hung over Ground Zero, New Yorkers began talking about rebuilding. Because that's what they did. That's what they'd always done. The crane operator high above Hudson Yards squinted against the setting sun as he guided another glass panel into place. At 1,550 feet, the spire of One Vanderbilt was now the tallest office building in Midtown, though that record would likely last about as long as a snowball in July. New York's 21st century skyline was becoming a forest of super-talls. Needle-thin luxury condos built for oligarchs and tech billionaires. The city had always catered to the rich, but now it was vertical. At 432 Park Avenue, apartments started at $20 million, yet half stood empty, ghost towers in the sky. Meanwhile, down at Ground Zero, the Freedom Tower, officially One World Trade Center, rose slowly, its design evolving through endless compromises. At 1,776 feet, its height was symbolic, but its form, a glass obelisk atop a concrete fortress, seemed uncertain, torn between defiance and fear. The climate protesters chained themselves to the gates of the new Shell Tower in Hudson Yards. No new construction, their signs read. The sea is coming. They weren't wrong. After Hurricane Sandy in 2012, it was clear that New York's relationship with water had come full circle. The island of Manhattan, once surrounded by protective marshes, was now vulnerable to rising seas. Architects proposed solutions: floating parks, amphibious buildings, massive seawalls. But the developers kept building higher, as if they could outrun the floodwaters by climbing toward the sky. Somewhere in the financial district, a preservationist scraped at the facade of an old cast-iron building, revealing the original Dutch bricks beneath. The city's past was always there, hidden under layers of paint and progress, waiting to be rediscovered. New York has burned before. It has gone bankrupt, been abandoned, attacked, rebuilt. Its skyline is never static, always rising, falling, transforming. The Dutch stonemason Peter van Dyck could never have imagined the glass towers of today, but he would have understood the impulse that built them, the same drive that made him stack bricks in the wilderness 4 centuries ago. Because New York isn't just a city. It's an argument with itself, with the world, with time. An argument about what matters, who matters, how we should live. And like all great arguments, it has no end. Only another beginning. Subscribe, follow, share, and be inspired by the heroes who have paved the way for future generations.